Hey guys, I'm very excited to present to you the solution to a problem that has been plaguing chess players of all levels, from beginner to grandmaster alike, and everyone in between. And that is the question of how to not lose against 1d4. You see, d4 is one of these moves that can be played in so many different ways. That's why it can be hard sometimes to find a position that is actually to your taste, true or true. So rather than trying to force a win with black against 1d4 with rubbish like the England Gambit, instead in this video I'm going to present a very high level weapon played by many of the world's best players in the last 2 years. A line that I believe doesn't actually have a name currently, but if you have some name, I'm welcome to hear your suggestions in the comments. And it's a line with knight f3, d5, knight c3, c5. So you might think, okay, it's just going to be a normal semi-Tarrasch or Tarrasch system after cd5. But no, black just swaps everything in the center with cd4, queen d4, ed5, and says, okay, I got an IQP, but your queen is in the center and is going to get kicked around like a soccer ball. So almost like a reverse Alapin, actually, in some respects. And, well, my current name that I have for this is the Covert variation, just because this line started to become popular at a high level around the time that, the Covert started to become a big problem. And much like Covert, it's also a very annoying system where it just makes it very hard for white to even, get a serious advantage against d4, against a very well-prepared opponent to even realistically play for a win. Now, I guess also to talk a little bit more about this opening, the first game we have here was played between Shakhriyar Mamedov against Wesley So. And in that game, Mamedov played one of the main trends of bishop to g5. Funny enough, actually, there was a video I recorded just before this one, funnily enough, where Mamedov was playing white against Duda in Tata Steel 2022. And in that game, Mamedov played the move e4, which actually it also used a couple of years ago to beat Wesley So in a rapid game. But we're going to talk about this main line going for, the end game in the next game. For now, let's focus on bishop g5, because I think that's also an important move to show that even though we have the IQP and white gets the pin, the black is still doing completely fine here. So after e3, black goes castle, saying that, okay, I'm going to keep you guessing a bit so that, if white plays, for example, a move like bishop b5 trying to play against knight c6, well, then we can play a move like a6, for example, and kind of kick the bishop and just be a bit annoying. For example, bishop a4, knight c6, and okay, you can take if you want, but then, we've got hanging pawns instead of double pawns. Black also has the bishop pair, and your position is basically, after some h6, bishop e6, c5, etc., is just going to be completely fine for black. So instead of that, Mamedov decides to play the old main line of bishop to e2. The modern engines like the idea of playing rook to d1 and this very weird queen to d2 move, but honestly, it's not really a major try for an advantage, like knight c6, and, they can take if they want to and try to win a pawn, but it just doesn't really lead anywhere special after take, 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 take. I mean, you can probably just play bishop to b2 is probably just fine, just win the pawn back, and, rook b5 isn't winning a pawn because bishop c3 comes with a check. So that's the reason black is doing fine. Even moves like knight b4 are probably also fine for similar reasons. So yeah, black gets full compensation and even just gets the pawn back directly, as it were. So the move bishop e2 is Shak's choice, and this leads to a more, let's say, typical kind of position with knight c6, queen to d3 was played. And now a very nice move by Wesley So. This was from the Meltwater Tour Final Tournament 2021, by the way. So h6 is played, realizing white's not really threatening to take that pawn again if black has a bishop b2 move at the end. As you can see, I have no idea how to draw arrows, but I can show you how to play better chess. And remember that the easiest way for you to show your support for my mission to help lots of chess experts become masters is to smash that like button. And the easiest way for you to improve your chess, hit the red subscribe button to subscribe to the channel. So let's continue with how the game went. Bishop to h4 was played, keeping the tension. Queen to b6. You could also go bishop e6. It's also playable, but I like the way that Wesley So played it. Going rook d8 and really supporting the d4 break, because if black is able to release the position and, you know, trade off his isolate queen's pawn, then there's absolutely no question he is doing fine. So rook fd1 was white's move to cover this. And actually, this is where, in fact, I believe black made a bit of a mistake. The correct approach is just to be patient, play bishop e6, knight b5, of course not blunder the Queen Botez Gambit style. But after knight b5, just to play rook c8 and just sit on the position. Yeah, the knight looks pretty on d4, but it's kind of like, so what? I just bring the bishop back, and, you know, what is white kind of doing? I mean, you have ideas like playing knight e4 at some moment, say if the bishop retreats, or if it doesn't, maybe even go g5 and then knight e4 and kind of add a bit more spice and flavor to the position. But yeah, computer says just basically equal, that, you know, you have one weakness, but it's well defended, and, you know, black has enough counterplay with the pieces. Kind of like a Rogozin style position if you want to draw that comparison. But instead, black goes queen takes b2, and unfortunately, well, actually, to be fair, it's not as bad a move as I first thought. Because after rook b1, at first I thought white might have some little tactic here, like bishop takes f6, and, well, this is actually what happened in the game, that white does get the pawn back. But after knight d5, yeah, this was actually the moment where, you know, black could play a move like queen takes d3, be slightly worse than the ending, but probably able to hold. But instead, so had analyzed this super deeply with the engine and played queen a2, which I think that if this was played in like the pre-computer era, probably, you know, they would think that black was some beginner who didn't know first principles of keep the king safe. But even though you have these doll pawns around the king, white's also not really in a great position to actually attack the king with the pieces. And so if black plays a move such as either knight d4 and, you know, just retreats the queen even, is what the machine is claiming is fine for black. You know, just queen d6 and kind of, you know, push the a pawn, get some counterplay before white focuses fire on the black king. Well, there's also a move bishop e6 that's so played in the game. And after rook b7, black continued with the move rook to d6, and it just turns out that the position looks very good for white, but it's not that easy to turn into something concrete somehow. You know, the a-pawn is definitely a force to be reckoned with in the long term, and if white isn't able to get some direct attack on the black king, I mean, what is white's advantage, yeah? So rook d1 is played, queen a1, and, you know, still the players I think are playing very close to perfect play at this point. But even so, it took a lot of energy for Mamedov to find these good moves, and his move rook d1 is maybe a very slight step in the wrong direction. Maybe not objectively, but on a practical kind of level. Actually, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh, because at first I thought that there might be some bishop f5 to fork, but actually then it would be black who gets forked, so you got to be a little bit careful, of course. But black just goes rook 88, make sure everything is covered, and it wasn't originally my plan to go through the full games, because I was the video might be a little bit too long, but, I mean, the move h4 is probably, you know, not the most precise. I mean, I guess the idea is he doesn't want to run into queen e3, queen g5, and a possible endgame. But that does give black the opportunity to take d4 if he wants to. Or to move in the game, queen f5 is also very solid. But I think that Mamedov probably just overpressed at some point. Like after this, I mean, he played queen to f4. I mean, trading the queens isn't obviously not going to give white anything special. Interesting enough, it's kind of surprising a little bit that So didn't play rook d4 and try to win a pawn using the fact that rook d4, queen b1 is a thing, because that would be a pretty cool idea to get on the board. But okay, went queen f5, and this is where I think Shuck, well, rook queen h6 is fine, but at some point, yeah, white just self-destructed. And it's something I think is quite common when you play these very solid systems, that, yeah, at 2800 level, it's just a drawing weapon, let's say, but at lower levels, you can just play very solidly and let the opponent kind of beat themselves up, good or good. So rook bc1 was played. Black went queen to e5, just attacking the bishop. There are lots of other decent moves. Obviously, bishop g4 is a mouse slip. But yeah, after this, white goes rook d4, and yeah, still white is kind of, I think, you know, like a dog chasing cars. Apparently, white should just play a move like rook b1, or, you know, move the bishop this way, and, you know, position is just equal. Of course, after rook b1, black's not actually threatening to take the bishop, because rook b8 back rank mate. But if black plays pretty much any other move, he's going to be fine here. So instead we have bishop h5, and unfortunately that's kind of a big step in the wrong direction. Bishop h5 looks nice, but it's kind of like, what are you actually threatening? Yeah, rook h4 is not winning material because bishop f7, but if you don't fall for the idea, it just looks kind of silly. In fact, if black plays a5, apparently this is already just very strong just to push the pawn. In the game, so played rook d8, which kind of gives white a second chance to, kind of correct his mistake and hold. Apparently with some f4 or some other rook move, but instead white went bishop f3, and now black start to get on the right path with a5, and, well, Mamedov realized that suddenly this is not so easy for white to draw, because if that pawn gets to a2, it's perfectly supported by the bishop, and, yeah, somehow white lacked the, I guess, sort of detachment from ego to realize that you just have got to play a move like queen e5 and get the queens off, or play a move like queen a3 and just kind of hang on for dear life. Instead, white thought he could be aggressive with queen a7, but unfortunately it just doesn't work. If black had played queen b2 and then just pushed the pawn, he probably just wins the game. In the end, so played queen d4, which wasn't as good, but it still was a win anyway for him in the game, after white didn't defend in the best fashion. So yeah, that was this game. Like, I'm not going to show every single move, but you can kind of see that bishop g5, while it's an attempt to, keep more pieces on the board and try to outplay black, the rising position is pretty much equal. Engine will at first give like some plus 0.2 edge for white, but if you go deeper, it just peters out just to equality, like bishop e7, castle, knight c6, bishop e6, etc., etc. So anyway, that was this game. Actually, before I move on to the next game, I do want to point out this is not like a 100% complete repertoire, just because, of course, if you are playing this move order, you also need to be ready for the Nimzo Indian. But I already covered this in a video on the Nimzo Indian called, d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4 basic ideas. You might notice a card up above where you can click that if you want to complete your repertoire, as it were. In any case, let's continue on. Well, one other line I will also point out that I'm not covering super deeply here is the Catalan. Because the end, Catalan's sort of opening, I think, is complex enough that if you're rated below 2000, I honestly don't think you're going to face it much, at least not from players who kind of understand the opening. And if you are rated over 2000, then it's probably better we cover it in a separate video, true or true. But if you want some lazy system that sort of fits in the spirit of this repertoire, I would probably suggest something like dc4. And maybe going for something like c5 and just play very directly. I mean, at least you're kind of playing c5 in this line as well and just aiming to liquidate the center. And there are different lines you have to learn, like dc5 is the modern main line, but, I used to play queen a4 a lot when I was playing Catalan as white. And also other moves like knight e5 and even knight a3 that also need to be learned. So there's a bit of a workload, but if you kind of know a bit of what you're doing, you can gradually equalize. I mean, the ending is slightly better for white at the moment, but if you go deep, it kind of just peters out to equality, like knight d2, c3, and okay, this is not the place to go deeply into it, but you can kind of see that, black is very solid, and, white has some piece pressure down against the b7 pawn, but, if you know what you're doing, you play, like, bishop d7, rook fc8, and so on, or rook ac8, and just develop, and then, basically, yeah, you're able to maintain the balance with precise play. And, of course, there are other lines, like bishop e7 lines, and bishop b4 lines, like, there are a lot of choices, of course, but this is one option that maybe is more in the spirit of this repertoire, in case you wish to do your own research. Games of players like Anton and Ganguly are good ones to follow for the such lines. But anyway, let's move on to our next game that was played between Timur Rajabov playing against Jordan van Foreest. It's kind of funny, actually, because all of these games, actually, that I've shown here, even though it's how to not lose versus d4, actually end in wins for black, except for this one, which is just a solid draw. Van Foreest at the time was rated about 62 points below Rajabov. So draw with black is a pretty good result in that context, especially considering this is from the European Team Championship, where, obviously the general strategy is, draw with black, or at least not lose with black, and then win on the whiteboards to win the match, to get the match points, as it were. So cd5, also another line I won't be covering deeply in this video is the move e3. I mean, this semi-tarish line, it does have a right to exist, of course, and it is somewhat popular, but one kind of lazy system you can play is like a6 and, either play it like a Moran with dc4, b5, and, that will give you pretty easy equality. Which, by the way, is the reason why it normally plays cd5, but then you're going to get a very similar kind of IQP type position to what we saw in the first game, where the bishop was on g5, and, well, you could potentially make an argument, in fact, that it's actually a better version for black with the bishop stuck on c1. So that is something like, let's say, cd4, knight d4, bishop to d6. I mean, it's just a normal position. It's not like there's, a massive body of theory or something, but, you know, you just play chess like queen c7, bishop e6, and, you know, it's a game you play and the better player will win as such. That's going to be true in general for openings, but of course, if you do your homework and deeply study IQP positions, for example, the Berburenbrook winning pawn structures is very, very good for this topic, then yeah, you're going to have very good results playing this as black, and probably even as white as well if you mastered the IQP positions. They're just really important positions to know how to play if you are serious about becoming a chess master. Of course, if you're really serious about becoming a chess master, you know, you can always reach out to me via the DM to talk about the next steps for your situation. But anyway, let's continue on to the game with CD5, and this is, like, theoretically speaking, it's sort of the critical approach. You had to go E4 and say, alright, I'm going to take you on. Knight C6 used to be a line, but now D4 is the main trend, and actually this line is one that, you know, I actually covered a very similar topic in a video for the people who are part of my 1800 to 2000 plus program, which, okay, as always, you can reach out to me via DM if, like, you're at 1800 and you want to improve more quickly. Naturally, it's a lot cheaper than my, you know, 2000 plus to master program, but anyway, the option is there if you want to look at that training and, you know, get to that 2000 level really fast, if that's you. Anyway, in this position, actually, I remember that the game Mamedov of Duda, which I'm not going to go into deeply because I already covered in my Tata Steel recap, but that game went take, bishop to g5. And I think in my video I recorded for my, for my program 1800 to 2090 days, I think I remember covering like knight c6 and king e8 sort of plans. But Duda came out with a very interesting alternative h6, and as I explained in the video of the Tata Steel recap, well, Duda played this move of f5 in the game, but I think that an easier equalizer is probably to go bishop g7. That said, if they go knight c5, you've got rook c8 ready. And if they play knight g3 instead, then you can kind of go h5 and sort of hit the knight. And then with moves like knight c6, f5, you actually get very nice play against their king. And, you know, it turns out you're really not at all worse in such a position as black, according to very, very deep engine analysis. Or if they do play bishop to b5 instead, then it turns out that you can actually play a very nice idea, which, again, I did show in the Tata Steel recap video, but for those who haven't seen it, the point is that you can actually play this very nice knight c6 move. And either they take your knight and the position is just equal, or they play knight b7, and it turns out that you just have this monster initiative on the dark squares. So is that good or good? So that's kind of the key point to understand. Of course, there are lots of other moves White can play, but, you know, bishop c4, for example, might be another natural-looking move, but king e7, king f7, I mean, you're just going to develop normally, right? You know, you can just play like knight d7, bishop on some square, and I mean, you're not really in any serious danger of losing. Yeah, White's got the bishop pair, and you've got an isolated pawn, but they will take, it will take some time for White to get rid of this e4 pawn, but then you can kind of liquidate enough pieces, the position is just very balanced afterwards. So those are kind of the main ideas. I mean, this is not the video to cover every single move White can play, but in the game after bishop d2, which is kind of a, let's say, attempt to play it a bit differently, we had bishop b4, and, okay, it makes sense that knight e4 is obviously not going to give any kind of special advantage if black just develops normally. So White goes knight e6 in this version, saying that, okay, I at least get my pawn back directly, so I'm not having to worry about that. But the arising position is very, very dry. I mean, yeah, your pawn on e6 might look like a weakness, but it's only one isolated pawn, and the reality is you've got enough active piece play to make up for it. As is pretty well demonstrated in the game, in fact. Rook c1, rook c8. I mean, Van Foreest, of course, you know, he's a second for Magnus Carlsen for the 2021 World Championship match against Nepomniachtchi, so it's not a surprise that he is very well prepared here. Take, bishop d3, king d7. Position is just basically equal. White has a microscopic advantage, bishop versus knight, isolated pawn, but it's just very hard to use that tangibly here. Rajabov played knight to e4, and Van Foreest is quite happy to just liquidate. If you want to keep more tension, you can play moves like king e7 or knight d5, which could be a way to try to keep the game going and maybe keep some chances to win against a weaker player. But of course, in a match situation, black is very happy just to liquidate. Take. Knight f5 is quite a nice move. Just knight on d6 just covers everything really nicely. Of course, White's not really threatening to take because rook b8 and you get the pawn back. Yes or yes. Thanks to the skewer. So king e2, knight to d6. Okay, computer says h6 a tad more precise, but it really doesn't matter at this point. h6, h4, rook c8. So black just has a fortress, basically. I mean, you can't really get at this weakness, and there aren't any other easy weaknesses to latch onto. f4 and now e5 was a nice move by Van Foreest. Just, it's not strictly necessary to hold, but it just liquidates that weakness. Because otherwise f5, e4 is a little bit annoying to deal with. So fe5 take, and yeah, it just ends up being a repetition. With the rook and king just moving back and forth. King e3, rook e5. King f3, draw agreed. So the game itself, yeah, was like pretty vanilla, but it shows how if you are well prepared and you have like a knowledge of a few of these ideas, you might just be able to hold a draw very almost effortlessly with black, even against a top player. Of course, you know, it's not, of course, 100% guarantee. Like, of course, if you're, let's say, I know, a 2000 player and you're playing a 2700 GM, then yeah, they're going to grind and grind and grind, and you're going to have to keep playing well to hold. But at least it will give you that situation, maximizing your chances of basically neutralizing their white piece completely in terms of the opening. So that, I think, covers the ideas with knight c3, c5 pretty well. Like I said, I'm open to your suggestion and comments of what this cd5, cd4 variation should be named. Because Covert variation, well, it's sort of like a half-joke kind of name, but probably there is a better one out there that people can come up with. So interested to hear your thoughts on that. Now, the next games I'm going to cover are actually going to be games that are not with d4 and c4, in fact. Because, I mean, yeah, it's true they can play stuff like Catalan or Nimzo, but like I said, it's sort of better topics for other videos later on, right? Or ones I've already done in case of the Nimzo Indian video. I mean, I suppose in theory you could play like d5 and you could play this move order and kind of aim for, I don't know, knight c3, knight f6 and try to get it in this way. But there are some clear disadvantages with this move order. One being that you have to be ready for the exchange variation, which is not necessarily a bed of roses for black on a practical level. And also if they play bishop g5, they just completely avoid your c5 idea. Like, it just doesn't make sense as much, I think, in this version. Okay, it's true you can play moves like dc4 and c5, and you can kind of play, I guess, in this way if you want to beg for a draw, but you know, it's not like the most fun way to play it, I think. I think it's better to put in a bit of extra work, learn a system against the Nimzo. I mean, with this move order, you still have to learn a system against a Catalan anyway, so it's not like you really avoid that issue in any case. But yeah, like I said, it's worth learning the Nimzo in order to not have to worry about the exchange variation or some early bishop g5. I mean, if they do play bishop g5 in this version with an iron f3, then dc4 does kind of work better, actually, because if they go knight c3, for example, which is kind of the old main line, you know, nowadays different e4 approaches kind of became the modern trend, but okay, it's not seen that often at a GM level in general. Well, the point is that you're not limited to, let's say, transposing to a Rogozin Vienna or transposing into a semi-Slav Botvinnik, but actually you can play a6 and you can't get this improved Botvinnik semi-Slav because you often get an ec5 in one go rather than playing c6 and then c5. So it just works out really, really well for black for that reason. Okay, having done this kind of long, let's say, threading the pieces together, now I can show you how Keyang beat Ferruccia in the World Blitz Championship in Warsaw, where Ferruccia played London system, I guess following in the footsteps of Magnus Carlsen, who often played the London and Blitz in the past as well. But Keyang, of course, very well prepared player, and he came ready with this very nice system of e6. And now, by the way, if white does play c3, that's not what happened in the game, but I just want you to understand why, if they are committed to an early c3, why it's not the most precise for white. It's mainly because of the move bishop to d6. And normally when you have this tension between the bishops, white goes bishop g3. I mean, if you've watched my London videos, you'll notice already, but the point is after castles knight bd2 that black is not limited to playing knight c6 and transposing into the old main line, or as we like to call it, the universal system, but rather he can play the move queen to c7 instead. Which kind of nullifies the knight e5 idea when you can just go knight d7, but also, if they do play the normal bishop d3, again, knight bd7. If knight was on c6, dc5 would actually be winning a pawn because of the pin, but here, of course, we can take back with the knight or with the queen. And black actually has a few different ways to equalize here. Like, you can go b6 and bishop b7, which is kind of what the computer recommends, just, you know, develop solidly, and only then play the e5 break. But you could also play the e5 break immediately, either with bishop takes g3 first or just directly. it would also give you a completely fine position. You know, kind of like it's like a Catalan, actually, where, you know, instead of the bishop being on g7, we recycle the bishop and got the pawn side by side in the center. And certainly if we get a structure like this, you can see that with black's extra space, probably objectively it's equal, but only black can really be better in such a position, in my experience. Well, instead, knight bd2 is kind of aimed against this. Now, if you're wondering why not bishop d6 now, the answer is that dc5 is a little bit annoying. And like if you take and they go c4, I mean, it's just slightly unpleasant. It's like a Blackburn QGD, but where the knight is a little more flexible on d2 than on c3, which does give white some tiny advantage. Okay, probably you can neutralize if you analyze deep with the computer, but I have a much simpler way of doing things. And that is to play the move queen b6 at this point, which is kind of the main trend at a high level, where you just attack this pawn. And after rook to b1, then Keyang just plays a move bishop to d7, which actually this is a little bit of a twist. Like, normally bishop d6 is how they play it, saying it, okay, you can go dc5 or go bishop d6 and then dc5. But kind of saying you can take back with the queen, so it's not as effective when white is, you know, committed to this weird rook b1 move already. I mean, you can still play this. I mean, you can go b4, c4, and, you know, white has some play, but it probably is quite close to equality if black knows what he's doing. But bishop d7 is a more creative approach, saying that, okay, if you play dc5, well, now I take with the bishop, and I got into bishop d7 developing move for free. And bishop d7 itself is actually a kind of useful move if you think about it. Because if white plays a move like c3, for example, we can take on d4, and after the normal ed4, like, yeah, normally the bishop should be on g4 or f5, and that would be the way for black to fight for equality. But in this very specific position, black has this move bishop b5. A very nice way to trade off the bad bishop for white's good London bishop. And I mean, if the bishops get traded, I think black is just completely fine. You know, alpha zero style ideas are suggested here by the engine like h4, h5, but okay, I think objectively, if you just play like bishop e7, knight d7, get the king castle, I don't really see any reason for black to be worse at this point. Maybe, I know, because I played the London so much as white, I'd find it a bit easier to play white, but realistically, it's not a big problem for black when you're solid with no weaknesses and no bad pieces. So anyway, the game went bishop e2 instead. Black played to move bishop b5, kind of continuing the idea. Though I will say again, I think it's more precise to take first and then go bishop b5. Maybe Keyang didn't want to allow knight d4, but I think if you just play bishop e7, castle, knight c6, just normal moves, I don't really see any reason for white to be better when he's, you know, got a central minority, as it were. Anyway, the game went bishop b5, and okay, it's not the most precise. White played the move c4, and it did allow white to get a strong initiative, though it is true that Ferruccia kind of misplayed it afterwards. Like, after bishop e7, I guess the way in which white should play it is probably something like knight e5 and try to, you know, just open up the center and take the initiative before black can castle. In the game, knight c4 did still give white an advantage, though, you know, after take. But okay, like I said, the reason that Ferruccia got this nice advantage is because Keyang did misplay the opening a little bit. And okay, it's true, later on, Keyang was able to neutralize white's edge. You know, for example, white should probably go b4 and, you know, kick the bishop back, bring the queen and rook out, and that would give it a very nice initiative with white's bishop pair. Instead, white kind of played knight e5, which just wasn't really that appropriate in the position. You know, knight c6, you know, once the pieces get traded, black was able to just slowly neutralize white's advantage. And I guess, you know, Ferruccia kind of just, well, he had a chance to kind of repeat moves not for a draw later. He turned it down and went on to lose. So, yeah, that was kind of the story with this game as such. Where, I mean, admittedly, black kind of messed up the opening, but if you remember the correction going cd4 and only then playing bishop b5, then you will get solid equality out of the opening. So, with that simple solution to the London suggested, which I think will probably surprise all but the most advanced and booked up players, let's continue on to another setup. And actually, we can see that Keyang is a little bit of a hero for this video, because here we have another game he played against David Anton Guijarro, this time in the World Rapid Championship of 2021, which was also in Warsaw and was played 2 days before that Ferruccia game I just showed. And it's just to show how easy it is to kind of adapt the ideas if they do play some different systems. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on the game, but just to kind of show you how black equalized. Of course, you may recall that Keyang may have some very good memories of this position, having, you know, beaten Magnus Carlsen with black in Game 8 of the 2016 World Championship match. where in that case, Keyang went like c5, knight c6, and, they played this this kind of thing. I think Castle went like dc5 from memory, but didn't really get anything out of the opening. But in this game, Anton Guijarro, he actually does decide to play the move dc5 also in this position in the style of Magnus. Because if you play knight bd2 and you try to go for the usual knight e5, f4, and this kind of hack attack, for example, the problem is black can even play a move like bishop a6 and kind of just trade off the bishop even before the attack happens. Which, by the way, is one advantage of not rushing to play knight c6 or knight bd7 earlier. It gives you that extra flexibility. And white can avoid it with c4, but, I mean, the pin is still a bit annoying, and in general, like, black should not be in any way worse in such a kind of symmetrical structure. But also kind of the tension between the pawns does give some scope for the better player to win here, as one would expect. So white goes dc5, just plays to release the tension, bishop c5, knight bd2, and again, you can see it's a very symmetrical structure. I mean, you can see that the way in which these guys are playing for the winners, black in these games, is not really to try, let's say, attack very directly, but to say, okay, I'm well prepared. I'm just going to play for solid equality, and then I'm going to let you kind of overpress a bit, make some mistakes, maybe get a bit frustrated, and then punish your mistakes and win. And I have to say, from my own experience as well, actually, playing professional chess, that some of my most successful results with black against players, let's say, 200 plus, actually came when I did follow that approach of I don't need to go crazy playing for a win. Let's just build up position steadily and let them kind of, make little mistakes, like micro errors as we go, that we can then punish later on, even in a simple position. So white goes queen to e2. Keyang, very solid player, just wants to go dc4 and trade everything. If it were up to me, I probably would have kept the tension, but there's nothing terribly wrong with the move play in the game. Like, the knight gets to a better square, but it's kind of like, so what? Black has 0 weaknesses. We had a3, a5. And so black is kind of just copying almost out of laziness, but it's kind of a good kind of laziness in a funny sort of way, because it allows us to build up a time advantage on the clock. After knight d4, this is the disadvantage of a5, that knight b5 as a whole. But it's actually not that big of a problem, because you can play around the knight pretty easily after knight b5. Well, black goes knight g6, and suddenly you might have some annoying ideas on the king side to try to provoke a weakening. And in the game, white didn't handle it in the best way. Like, probably should just go rook c1 and kind of accept that after rook c8, then maybe you have nothing better than just repeating the moves and, take the draw and go home and get ready for the next game. But instead, bishop d4 was played and, trying to get some tension, but it just is a mistake because of the next move, where black played knight to h4, now hitting this a very awkward time. White doesn't have g3 because knight f3, which only really leaves the move of f3 true or true. But now bishop takes d4. And if you play e takes d4, you just have a really bad IQP. But in the game after knight d4, black went e5, and suddenly black is taking the initiative in the center. A move like e4 would completely rip apart that white king. So knight f5 is played. Captures. Pawn to g6, kicking the bishop. And we can see that without really doing anything particularly special, Keyang has managed to get a very nice advantage out of the opening. We'll have the early middle game more precisely. Maybe bishop c2 is a lesser evil. Like, bishop a3, the bishop is... it covers c8, but what else is it kind of doing? And black just went for knight to d5. Okay, probably queen c5 is a little more precise, but... Okay, still this is giving a big advantage. White went queen b2, black played f6, and okay... Admittedly, because this was a rapid game, black didn't play it the best way. For example, he didn't see that the move queen c5 is incredibly strong, where you're just hitting this pawn. You're ready to go bishop a6, kick the knight out, and basically destroy e6. Destroy e3, rather. So that was sort of an opportunity, and I guess, the rest of the game was not super relevant, but since there are only a few more moves, I'll just quickly show it to the end. f6. E4 is a big mistake. You've got to play a4 here and not let black kick the knight, apparently. Because after e4, even though white wins a pawn, in theory, the problem is the tactics don't work out. After knight b6, rook d1, black played a very nice move, rook to d8, realizing that if white does play rook takes d8, that you're not just hitting the knight, but you're also threatening queen d1, king f2, knight d3. And if white has to give back the knight, it's like a position where, the bishop is just completely out of play. As you can see, my chess base is freezing. It's not used to the grandmaster speed of play. But yeah, you can see there's a threat of queen d1 and knight d3 forks. There's even a threat of knight f3 and take on f3. White can't really cover all of this at once, like queen f2, you're hanging the b3 pawn, for example, so it's just completely winning for black, yes or yes. So the way the game concluded instead was knight d5, which is the best defense. But still after ed5, we see a similar problem, right? After queen c5, the bishop just kind of looks stupid here, quite frankly. And if you go queen f2, which is apparently the only move to not lose immediately, like, still, black can play knight e2, knight d4, and because obviously, like, the queen is pinned as such. But yeah, like here you can see that black's getting the pawn back, while even this pawn is kind of falling. The king is quite vulnerable as well to queen and knight duo. And so black is probably going to be winning here as well with best play, but at least white can try to make black work for it a bit. Well, like, actually, white did play queen f2 in the game. Queen a3 was played, which, yeah, is also perfectly fine, to be fair. Maybe after queen c2, maybe white can try this. Still after f5, I mean, the bishop still looks very silly on this square, and it's the big reason why white is still struggling. In the game after queen b6, black just plays the move rook to d6, stopping the pawn in its tracks. Queen c7, queen b3 hits the rook, and yeah, after rook e1, queen d5, since black is up 2 pawns for nothing and the bishop is still ridiculously placed, this is why Anton Guijarro resigned in this position. So with that, we have, okay, so there are actually a couple more games I do want to show just quickly, just so you know how to deal with a couple of the sidelines and kind of see, you know, how to kind of adapt this up against different things they can play. Our penultimate game was actually played between a player who I mentioned earlier in this video. Ferruccia was playing as black. This is also from the World Blitz Championship in Warsaw 2021, by the way. And he was playing against Adly, one of the top Egyptian grandmasters. Actually, I remember he came to Australia for the 2017 Australian Open, in fact. So yeah, after G3, and I remember it because also I won that title, so a good chance to, yeah, share that, you know, before I was doing lots of YouTube videos, I was also, you know, winning some tournaments and winning some titles. Anyway, after G3, bishop to G4. So, okay, this is obviously not the only approach. I mean, let's say, for example, if you're happy allowing transition to Catalan this way, I mean, you could, for example, play some system like B5 if you really want to just avoid C4. Of course, it does have its pros and cons, like white does have moves like A4, and they can try to argue B5 as a weakness. Though if black knows what he's doing, I think you can keep the white edge to an absolute minimum. But yeah, there are also other lines, like let's say if you normally play like bishop e7 against a Catalan normally, I mean, white doesn't really have a better move than c4 at this point, so that can be a lazy kind of system. But let's say if, I don't know, you normally play bishop b4 against the Catalan, for example, then obviously, yeah, this move order isn't going to really work that well as such. It's not going to be useful to have a move like bishop g4 in the works. And certainly if you have some experience with a Slav defense, I think that it will be, or even with the Torre defense, which is kind of with colors reversed, then I think this is a fairly natural sort of fit. And of course, you could also play a similar way against a King's Indian attack like d5, bishop g4, c6 kind of stuff. So white goes c4, e6. And now if white plays queen b3, you normally just go queen b6, and that normally works out fine. But here white goes knight c3 instead. And I think I remember looking at this actually in a book by Boris Avruk, where he had this Grandmaster Repertoire Classical Slav that I was going through in 2014, back when I was an IM. And I think I remember he recommended this dc4 move. It's kind of a general principle in these Catalan type positions that if they play knight c3, it's generally a good time to take the pawn, because then they don't have queen c2 or queen a4 anymore to kind of get it back. Like queen a4, just b5, right? Now, granted, white does still have ways to get compensation. I mean, you could play h3, for example, but okay, I mean, you could even chop the knight off if you want to and just, like, play very solidly. Push for an e5 break at some point. It's going to be generally how you free the position. I mean, or you can also just hang on to the pawn with b5 at some moment if they were to attack it. And I've already used some see, like, computer often recommend moves like b3 where you where you sack the pawn in Benko Gambit style that gets some open lines down queenside files. But again, I mean, queen b6, like, it's clear, I think, that you're not really better as white. You know, just an interesting position where a better player is going to win at the end of the day. But at least black's moves are not super difficult, right? Just develop and take it from there. So the game went bishop e7 instead, which admittedly is not the most precise, but even so, it's still, like, quite reasonable for black. Because obviously, yeah, white could have gone queen b3, then knight c3 to get a similar position. I'd play white should go queen b3, actually, because in the game 95, yeah, this didn't really, I think, prove all that effective somehow. Like, the knight looks nice, but what are you kind of doing if you're not getting an e4 in a way? So white goes bishop f4, and yeah, position just ends up being very kind of balanced castles. Rook e1, h6, and I mean, if white goes e4, just all the pieces just get traded off, and it just becomes some very equal kind of Caracan, let's say knight e4. Actually, maybe I'm being too conservative by saying it's equal. You know, maybe actually black is the one who is fighting for an advantage in such positions. But anyway, it's clear this is not dangerous for black at the very least when you can trade in the worst case. Computer is saying even though it's a really wacky g5 move that apparently favors black, but obviously, yeah, this is not sort of thematic, and black is fine without the move as well in a sense. So anyway, the game went queen to b3. Black just played quite thematically. Or actually, yeah, he played the move knight takes e5. Realizing that, well, bishop e5, queen b6, you just, you know, keep the tension between the queens, and kind of it's an instructive point. You're actually quite happy if they do double your pawns, because it kind of makes your structure more chunky, gives you an open file for the rook, and, you know, you can often push b5, b4, and kick the c3 knight and make the a2 pawn a target. So that's quite a nice thing to keep in mind for outplaying the opponent. But on the flip side, if they do play a move like c5, for example, then yeah, I mean, you're quite happy to take and go knight d7. You know, the fact you're able to go e5 and take over the center, definitely, you know, the fact white's on time go b4, b5 is a big reason that black is a lot better already, at least according to the machine. So white goes d5 instead, but yeah, knight d7, and it's sort of like, well, what is white doing? I mean, if rook queen takes b7 is played, then the problem is knight c5 actually kind of runs the queen out of squares. If queen c6, you can actually trap the queen with rook to c8, queen b5, and now the key move is rook to b8. Okay, there are other winning moves as well, but this is the simplest. Queen c6, rook b6, and bye-bye goes the queen. And if they play queen b4 instead, the problem is you've got like even knight d3 just to win material. And, well, actually, okay, computer says it's even better to throw in rook b8 and then play knight d3 because you got an extra developing move. But yeah, same idea. White is just losing the house at this point. As you can see, I'm so excited that draw arrows are going everywhere. So white goes cd5 instead, trying to cut the losses. But after knight c5, queen e4, ed5, this is just a better structure for black. You know, you've got the healthy pawns, and their double pawns kind of look a bit silly. So white goes e4 to undouble the pawns here, but it didn't really work out that well. Like, you probably, as white, you just have to go knight e4 and accept that, you know, knight d3, and yeah, your pawn structure is going to kind of suck after rook e3 take, but, you know, at least the game goes on and you're still in the fight. It's not that easy to exploit the double pawns. But black does have the bishop pair, so I mean, you are still quite a lot better. Still, this is better than what happened in the actual game, where after bishop takes e4, which already looks like a kind of weird move, to be honest, yeah, black just took, and, you know, in the end, black was able to kind of use his bishop pair advantage to eventually win. He played bishop b4, just kicking the rook out of the way, take, rook f d8, and, well, at this point, I'm a little bit surprised, actually, that, you know, white didn't, well, okay, I was thinking knight d6, but actually g5 traps the bishop. White can't take because of the pin, so that's actually quite an important point. I mean, the ending is not like winning for black per se. I mean, if white goes knight d6 here, you know, you block the h file, block the d file. And I mean, if you're able to force a trade like bishop d6, I mean, white is probably able to draw with the opposite colored bishops if he continues to play well. The white kind of self-destructed and played the move g4, which is just asking a bit too much of the position. After rook d1, king g2, and now the move bishop to e6. I mean, technically bishop g4 also works, but bishop e6 is even better. You know, just attacking this weakness, and, you know, white's just kind of being like a sort of berserker dog, where, you know, the dog tried to bite, but it was one left with all the wounds at the end. You know, b4, bishop e6, knight c5. I mean, just look at how powerful this bishop is with bishop d5. King h3 is forced, because king g3, g5, the bishop gets trapped. And yeah, black just went a5, and I mean, white just has too many weaknesses, and in the end, black won't want to win in another 20, let me do some quick math, another 17 or 18 moves from this position. So yeah, a pretty convincing win by black, and definitely a good example of how, again, with this style of play, we're kind of encouraging white to sort of overextend, to maybe try too hard to attack, and then sort of exploit the weaknesses that are left behind to our advantage. And the final game I'll show for that is, well, to be honest, it's a game that is probably not one we need to go into super deeply, but I'll just show you a few moves. A game between Drave against Serrana in the Lindor's Abbey Blitzer Tal Memorial Tournament 2021. Because there will be someone who's asking, well, Max, what about things like the Torre attack, or, what about things like the Verasov or the Rajabov London? I mean, in such case, a very lazy system to play that you can play would be just to play, for example, something like e6, for example, and, if you get in bishop b4 and c5, you're just doing great. But if they do know what they're doing and play knight b5 here, then yeah, you can just play knight a6 and, just develop normally. White's idea is of playing this weird knight c3, knight b5 is saying that your knight is a little bit offside on a6. But the reality is you are going to get in c5 either immediately, or more likely you're going to play c6 and kick the knight away. And maybe then play to move c5 and, you've got decent pressure on the center. In the absolute worst case, you can always, maneuver the knight back if you need to. Or if you want to be a bit more ambitious, like queen b6. Some you'll see moves like knight h5 actually to go after the bishop if they don't go h3. Which actually probably was a decent alternative to the c6, c5 in this particular version. But okay, if they go h3, yeah, obviously you don't have knight h5 anymore, and then you do kind of need the c6, c5 plan to sort of, have a good break and prove like 100% equality. So yeah, that's a simple way to neutralize the Rajabov London. And there was going to be weird gambits like e4 or, weird moves like bishop g5, but, in general, you can kind of follow a pretty common sense approach in some cases. Like, for example, if you play d5, yeah, there are moves like e3, bishop f6, and other sort of things, but, it's hard to really go wrong with, a central approach like c5, knight c6, and so on and so forth. Advanced players will want to look at this a bit more deeply, but like I said, the video would be kind of too long if I covered every single little sideline that White could play. Anyway, the game instead went knight f3, d5, and White went for bishop g5, the Torre, and this sort of shows the advantage of playing d5 as opposed to playing, say, e6, bishop g5 with the pin. The difference is that now knight e4 is just a very strong move, and this is why very few GMs actually play bishop g5 kind of in serious games. Because if White goes bishop h4, you can go like c5, queen b6, and just be very, very annoying like this, where it's not so easy for White to comfortably defend the b2 pawn. And if White goes bishop f4 is in the game, then yeah, e c5. And queen b6 again just works really well for Black. White's best bet is probably to go knight c3. I think it was Boris Gelfand who played this against me in a blitz game. I forgot where it was after bishop f4, bishop h4, but either way, it's the correct way for White to play. I think at the time I played knight c3, and it was like a must-win game for me to tie for first place in the blitz tournament. But although I got some advantage, he played very well, and it just ended up being a draw. But yeah, now I know that, queen a5 is a better move to pin the knight, and, it's a little bit annoying to deal with that pin from White's perspective. They're probably just still equal if White plays it right. But yeah, the game saw queen c1, which is sort of a very, common move at lower levels of play, like just play and avoid fury, but, in the game, Black went cd4, which I think wasn't the best way to play it. Black was still fine and went on to win, but I would probably go knight c6 instead, and, if they play dc5, then yeah, you just have a very nice central space advantage for free. And if they go c3, I think it was Sam Shankland who showed this in one of his chessable courses, this very fun idea of going like f6 with the idea of going cd4 and e5 and just kind of ripping open the center. It was very cool, actually, this idea. Like, if White goes knight bd2, for example, then you go like g5 and suddenly you're kind of, going after the bishop this way. Because, if they have to, double the pawns like this, that's obviously pretty bad for White. Or, yeah, if they go h3 to try to deal with g5, then, yeah, that's when this comes into play. And, e4 is a move they normally like to go, but, yeah, e5 and the fact you've got this pin is sort of why this all works. So that's the Cliff Notes version of the Shankland antidote to the Torre for you. Well, okay, maybe I shouldn't just call it after Shankland, because, this has been kind of known for a while with the engines, but, he was the one to kind of publish it in a sense most recently. So yeah, with that pretty much covers how to not lose against 1d4. This was definitely a very fun video, and I have to admit, like, after going for these lines, I'm very tempted to actually play some online games and try out these systems for myself, because there is something very attractive about just knowing that you're basically almost never going to lose against d4, at least not lose out of the opening, and to have a system where basically like either you draw or you win with Black. Because normally, like, if you think about playing for two results, this advanced Soviet concept of like playing these no-risk systems where you know, maybe it's a draw, like they play like normally. If they make a few little slips, you can sort of outplay them and win. Yeah, normally it's something you only need to do with the white pieces, but as you can see here, if you know these lines well enough, you can actually play for true results in a weird way with the black pieces, where it's like, okay, I know what I'm doing. You're not going to get an advantage out of the opening, so I'm pretty confident I'll get at least a draw. But if you overpress, or, you know, maybe if I catch you by surprise, you don't really know what you're doing, or you don't get the positions, then, well, I'm going to punish your mistakes. I'm going to beat you, like we have seen in the videos, in the games here. So yeah, do make sure to reach out to me as well if you are rated 2000 plus. Like, if you're really enjoying these kind of videos, but you want to take it to the next level and work with me on a more personal kind of level, you know, in an actual coaching program, then reach out to me via DM and we will discuss next steps. And also we'll share with you a cool training video as well that once you book a call. So another added incentive for you if you need it. Alright, so take care everyone. Good luck with your next game against 1d4 using what I call the Covert variation and the various other alternatives. And I'll see you next time.